I love that I look unhinged right now because I am. Anyway, let's talk about Glamorama. Glamorama is the fourth novel from author Bret Easton Ellis, who became famous with his original novel, his debut novel, Less Than Zero, and infamous with his third book, American Psycho, which was condemned even before its release for its exceedingly violent content. Glamorama is roughly bifurcated into two unequal halves, the first of which is about Victor Ward, a young, hip, fit model who is opening a nightclub with his organized crime-affiliated boss while also opening his own club on the sly. Things fall apart and proceed from there, and the second half is concerned with Victor being sent to Europe to track down a woman. He finds the woman, but in the process becomes embroiled in a terrorist cell made up of models who, and this is important, have no discernible ideology. This sounds like the plot of Zoolander, and fun fact, there was a lawsuit and it was settled out of court, and because of that, Ellis has not really spoken about what happened with the whole Zoolander thing, but Glamorama did come first. There's not a lot of plot. It goes from kind of a weird slice of life satire about models to being about a thriller, a sort of spy thriller. And that's pretty much it. And then it just kind of continues from there, and it ends on this contemplative shot of Victor kind of just sitting at a bar, staring at a mural, and it's ambiguous whether he lives or dies. So what makes something like this good? Well, for one thing, it's just the characterization, and this is especially prevalent in the first half of it. Victor is, to be blunt, not the brightest. He went to college, but a lot of that just kind of slid off, and as such, he has not a whole lot going on, and he doesn't have a rich inner life, which is fine. It's fine because this is a novel about surface. It's a novel about appearances. It's a novel wherein appearances and social standing are the most important things. And the most important things to Victor, and it's what a lot of the novel is concerned with, and what a lot of the novel wants to talk about, media, celebrity, that kind of thing. So thematically, it makes a lot of sense. But, and this is the other thing, the other part of this is that Victor is lent language by Ellis that he wouldn't normally have. You know, he's not, in his dialogue, super articulate. He speaks largely in pop culture references. He is very silly. He is not really there. Like, he's not really present. And, you know, all of that, you know, adds up to a character who shouldn't be able to serve as the first-person narrator of a book like this, which he does. You know, usually the first-person narratives in literary books are pretty, you know, well-spoken. Victor's not. And the way that Ellis gets around that is the way that a lot of authors have gotten around that when they're dealing with wanting to write first-person narrators or, you know, close third who are not, you know, hyper-educated people. He lends them the language. And the best example of that, like, well, not the best example of it, but a personal kind of favorite. I could be in Malibu lying on a beach towel. It could be 1978 or 1983. The sky could be black with spaceships. I could be a lonely girl draping scarves over a dorm room lamp. All week I've been having dreams made up entirely of helicopter pull-away shots, revealing a giant metallic space, the word beyond floating above that space in white and gold letters. Someone from the crew hands me a tambourine. And that last bit we'll get to. But, you know, that kind of language is, it's simple. It's not, you know, super rarefied necessarily, but it is artful and it is aesthetic, and minimal though it is nonetheless effective. and it's the kind of sentences he would string together that you wouldn't normally get. And he played off the dialogue. The other half of the prose in the book. Best example of this is probably in the first chapter. Yoki Nakamori was approved for this floor, Peyton says. Oh yeah, I ask? Approved by who? Approved by, well, moi, Peyton says. A pause. Glares targeted at Peyton and JD. Who the fuck is moi, I ask. I have no fucking idea who this moi is, baby. Victor, please, Peyton says. I'm sure Damien went over this with you. And that's, good. I don't know how else to put it. I like that dialogue. It's snappy. It's real back and forth kind of stuff. It's enjoyable. It's nice to read. It is complicated further on by the fact of the more complicated the things that they're talking about, the more necessarily complicated the dialogue is. But like right before then, the way the book opens is there's this big paragraph about specs on a bar, and it's just a paragraph of Victor ranting in his kind of Valley Boy sort of way. And then there comes the sentence, nobody around here has to wait long for someone to say something. And to me, like, that's great. Like, that shows us that Victor has awareness that he's not always accessing, and that we're perhaps not expecting of him. Like, he's a model, he's silly, he's not super smart, but you know what? He does have some idea of what's going on, and like it's kind of cluing you in to the fact that you're in good hands with your narrator, and that's something important. That's something that you don't always get in a book like this, and that's super good writing. Then there's the structural element. This is the most postmodern novel Ellis has written, I would say, and I mean the postmodern in the more, in the sense of DeLillo, Pynchon, Vonnegut, all those guys. David Foster Wallace, his contemporary and sort of rival, maybe. This wasn't too long after Infinite Jest came out, and like that, you could easily see like a bit of a line between the two. At least I think there is, in the sense that a lot of these great novels are encyclopedic. They're trying to gather a great deal of knowledge into something novelistic, and Ellis is doing that here. Like, you could recreate the entire television channel MTV from this book. Like the models, the music videos, the edge that it had, the pacing of it. Like, you could very easily replicate that just based upon this book, and that's a bit of an achievement, and that's something that's not to be taken lightly, and that is, like I said, kind of a postmodern sort of thing to do that, and to do it over something so trite. It's not Dublin. He's not trying to make Dublin like this vividly realized day in the life of a Dubliner. He's writing about MTV and models, and it's something very silly, and it's kind of thing that you're not necessarily going to completely understand, and I think that makes it really potent. The biggest postmodern element in the book is that there's a film crew that follows Victor around. And it's not clear if they're filming a documentary or a thriller, or if they even exist at all. But once Victor's in Europe, once he gets on the boat, because they put him on a cruise ship for plot reasons, once he's on a boat going to Europe, he starts getting followed around by this film crew, and he interacts with this film crew. And what effect that has is that it puts him at a distance from the horrors. Like, all of the violence and the horrific kind of content that he's experiencing, I call it content, but it's, the horrific experiences that he's having, he's at a distance from that because he's constantly in the mindset of I'm in a movie. Like that he's in a movie, or that he's watching a movie, or that he's like, it's like he's just not there. And that's fascinating. And that's like, it's such a meta move. It's kind of metafictional. It makes the text aware of itself in a way, because now you are, it's not just a spy thriller. You're watching someone filming a spy thriller in a way. So, that being said, this is going to be kind of as an aside, but that's something that's intimately connected to that. Is this a transgressive novel? The short answer is yes, in the sense that in the what Foucault might call transgression, in the sense that it's breaking taboos. It is violating taboos, and it is full of gore and sex and drugs and all that kind of stuff. But you see, here's the thing, and this is again going back to the terrorist cell. They don't have an ideology, and that's a big part of what makes transgressive fiction, is the fact that the transgression is not purely ideological. Violence for the sake of a revolution, be it a bourgeois revolution or a liberal revolution, that's not necessarily transgressive. That's revolutionary. Violence for the sake of maintaining the status quo, like reactionary violence, that's not transgressive at all. It's quite the opposite. The obvious thing I would think of is, the violence in the very first Purge movie is not transgressive. Or rather, the violence in the very first Purge movie might be seen as transgressive because there is less ideological content in it. Whereas the film, The First Purge, the one that takes place on Staten Island, that's revolutionary violence. That's not transgressive violence. It's a different kind of thing. And it's a very different tone of movie if you watch the two of them. One is like kind of, like the home invasion. It's not a very good movie, the very first Purge movie, but it's still, like the home invasion and the violation of norms and all that kind of stuff. So it's the same kind of thing here. It's the fact that the terrorist cell has no ideology. They do not follow anything in particular. It's posited that it might be one of a dozen different things over the course of the book, but it's never, nailed down. They're just doing it for the sake of doing it, or they're doing it at the behest of an unknown benefactor because they're being told to do it. And that is basically putting Victor, because he's in that filmic kind of thing that he's sitting in, it puts him in a position of being a character in, and also a reader of, a transgressive novel or viewing a transgressive film. Like, that's basically what he's doing. He's watching this violence happen, and also partaking in this violence that's happening as both participant and viewer. Like, this is the kind of relationship that he has, and that's very metatextual, because it's kind of the same relationship that we're having to the book. I'm not saying that we're performing violence when we read it, but we are kind of, there is a relationship there with the text, with the reader. Like, there's an interaction there. And the kind of, it's between Victor's blissed out kind of attitude and, the drugs that he's on and the film crew, it kind of puts him in a position where he's the reader of a transgressive novel, and now we get to both participate in a transgressive novel by reading one, and also kind of examining what effect does this have. And that's where kind of the moralistic elements, because Ellis is often called a moralist, and that's where the kind of moralistic elements come in, and you can kind of start to see that maybe there's like a corrosive aspect to this, and that the response is perhaps to reject it rather than to kind of uncritically consume and accept the violence, which kind of takes us to authorial intent, right? There was a book in between this and American Psycho, but this was the next novel after American Psycho, and you have to wonder if in some ways this is not Victor, this is not like a response to that it's not in conversation with that book, because Victor is, again, in the position of being the transgressive one, or in the position of being a viewer of a transgressive text, and that aspect of like corrosion or rejection or kind of lulling you into a false sense of security or whatever it is that there's a lot of stuff going on in Glamorama, but it's a question. I don't really like talking about authorial intent a whole lot, so I'm not really going to go too deep into it, but there is definitely a sense of kind of conversation with this in American Psycho. Patrick Bateman from American Psycho actually shows up in it. And this is also clearly an interest for him because he does go full meta in Lunar Park, which is about a guy named Bret Easton Ellis. So, so the sum total is that this is, on first glance, a shallow book. Right? It's all about the surface. One of the refrains is, "We'll slide down the surface of things," which is like from a U2 song. But the way that Ellis gets around it is he then stacks on all this other material, all these other elements. First with the prose, then with the structure, then with this thriller plot, then there's all the metatextual elements with the film crew and all that kind of stuff. Then there's all the criticism of transgression and the elements that are transgressive. And then if you want to go all the way to the authorial intent stuff, there's that as well, which, you don't have to consider that. But there's this like stack of elements that, really serves to make something that should be shallow fairly deep, just because there's so much stuff. When he did American Psycho, it was, again, very surface level, but he did try to get into the inner life of his protagonist, and he found, like, hate, anger, consumption, mental illness, sorrow, like that kind of stuff, but there wasn't really it was heavy material, but there wasn't really a whole lot there. And it kind of then is glossed over with a veneer of capitalist criticism, like criticism of capitalism, in the sense of like the upper classes consuming the lower classes, like the bodies of the lower classes, as in Patrick Bateman literally eats poor people. That is a different way of doing it. That is a very, different way of doing it. And it's effective. American Psycho is a good book, but I think Glamorama is better because it doesn't try to worry about the rich inner life or the lack of an inner life. When we do see the inner life of Victor, it's very shallow. But here's all this other material. Here's all these other characters. Here's all this other stuff that you're going to be able to sink your teeth into. It's written in a very minimalist style. It is of its time, the 80s and 90s transgressive novel boom, I guess you would call it. The Dennis Cooper, Kathy Acker, Chuck Palahniuk, Bret Easton Ellis. It was that time. It was a time when there were transgressive novel and transgressive fiction was like codified as a genre, and there were like these novels were like on major publishers, some of them. And it's it's a fairly thick book, but it's 500 plus pages. It's kind of a maxi minimalist style. It's a lot of short sentences and a lot of sparse prose, and but there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it than you might not see in a minimalist novel, which is usually shorter, or a straight like minimalist kind of novel. Some odds and ends. The book has one joke. This is kind of a flaw in a way. The joke is that Victor is not smart and that models are not smart, and it kind of hounds away at that a little bit. There's a lot of satire based upon the shallowness of the celebrities and the kind of the lack of like mental acuity or a presence that these people have. It's choosing to be very it's exactly what it sounds like it is. It's repetitive. It's a lot of the same joke, and you have to like the joke. I personally happen to like the joke, so I enjoy the book. But it is kind of the same thing over and over again. I think that there might be. I think that it might have fooled some people into thinking that it's smarter than it's intended to be. I don't think the satire is meant to be that important. It's just another layer on top of all this other stuff. Is the satire? It's not just a satire, and it's not like, I don't think he's saying anything that's like super groundbreaking about models or celebrity culture. I think it's like he's just saying it because he needs to say it to get it out of the way. The book is also extremely violent and sexual. There's some castration. There is dubious consent in sexual encounters. There's a lot of drugs. That's neither good nor bad. It's just the way it is. But if it's it's just, it is what it is. It's also like the gayest book Ellis wrote. He wrote gay characters in Less Than Zero and American Psycho, and The Informers, his short story collection. But he did not. This time Victor is a bisexual in denial. There is like a bisexual threesome. There is a lot of talk about homosexuality and queer culture from a very outside looking in sort of view, but it's there. And that's, again, neither good nor bad. It just is. And, an argument could be made that it's a plus just because it kind of lets the book straddle a couple of different lines. Like, it's richer for it. Because there's more stuff here. It's not just the straight world like an American Psycho. It's also it's also these different worlds. If representation matters to you, it's a super white book. There are queer characters, but it's super white. No one is a very good person, so there are, the queer characters. There's not good queer representation. I'm not going to get into whether that should matter or not, but it doesn't do that, and I think it's better for it. I can't recommend this as much as I would like to. I can't recommend it because I think that it's the kind of book you should read if you already know you're going to like it. Which I know that's kind of weird and that's kind of like counterintuitive, but it's the kind of book that you should read if you are a fan of Bret Easton Ellis, if you're a fan of so-called transgressive fiction genre, if you are a fan of, if you're really like a 90s literary completionist, I think it's an important book. If you are just kind of looking for a thrill, it's not bad. I would say that for what it's worth, this is my go-to book when you talk about, is transgressive fiction literature? This would be my go-to book to say yes, absolutely read Glamorama or however you pronounce it. It is aesthetically I think it is aesthetically pleasing. It is psychologically interesting. It's got the characters, it's got the world, it's got the plot, it's got the sentences, it's got all the things that one usually looks for when they're looking for a literary text. It's got all of that. It's just that it's subject matter and its content is not what you might usually think of when you think of transgressive, or when you think of literary fiction. It's not drawing rooms, and it's not farms, and it's not, war zones or orphanages or, whatever. The carnage is not meant to evoke that response in you. And that's the thing that makes it that usual response that you might get with literary fiction, where it's tragic things are tragic. This is tragic things are meant to be kind of funny or gross or numbing or that kind of thing. The kind of things that were usually be considered tragic, the violence and the sexuality and all that kind of stuff. This is not Colson Whitehead. But boy, is it something. And boy, is it a good read. I think that's all that I've got. Yeah, so Bret Easton Ellis, Glamorama. Yeah. Peace.